On Christmas Eve, when the world was wrapped in laughter, lights, and warmth, I carried a box of gingerbread cookies in my hands, the same kind I used to make when my daughter was a little girl. And I believed, deep down in my chest, that tonight she might look at me the way she once did, with gratitude, with love, with the memory of all the nights I stayed awake sewing dresses, paying bills I couldn't afford, working shifts that broke my back, just so she could grow up with a life better than mine. I told myself, this is Christmas, miracles happen tonight. But as I walked up those steps, I didn't know the door that would soon slam in my face would also slam on everything I had ever given. The snow was falling softly that evening, dusting the streets of our small Ohio town like powdered sugar on a cake. I could hear carolers down the block, their voices rising in harmony, a soundtrack of joy that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. In my hands, I carried the gingerbread cookies, wrapped in red cellophane, tied with a ribbon I had ironed flat so it would shine under the light. I had baked them that morning, humming to myself in my little kitchen, the one place in the world where I still felt useful. My daughter Emily always loved gingerbread. When she was 5, she'd sit on the counter, her tiny legs swinging, dipping her finger into the sugar bowl when she thought I wasn't looking. I would laugh and let her. Those were the years when love was simple, when being her mother was the only thing that mattered. As I walked toward her house, I thought about the sacrifices that had built this moment. After her father died, it was just the two of us. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, hemming dresses for neighbors, and volunteering at the church just to keep her close to something steady. I gave up my dream of running a little tailor shop because dreams don't feed children, and Emily needed food, not fabric. There were nights I ate crackers and tea so she could have milk and cereal for breakfast. I told myself that's what mothers do. That's what love looks like. Quiet sacrifice, never asking for anything in return. By the time Emily turned 16, she had her first car, a used Honda Civic that I bought with money saved from sewing wedding dresses for half the women in town. She barely looked at me when she drove it away, but I clapped and cheered, pretending her joy was mine. When she graduated college, I was the loudest in the crowd, screaming her name, tears running down my cheeks. She didn't see me. Her eyes searched for her boyfriend, not her mother, but I was there, always there. Every Christmas, I told myself one day she would pause long enough to remember who stood behind her all these years. This Christmas Eve felt like the right time. The house glowed with string lights, shadows moved inside, laughter spilling from the windows. I stood on the porch, my heart pounding harder than it should for a simple family visit. My hands shook, not from the cold, but from hope. I wanted her to open the door, to say, "Mom, come in, it's so good to see you," to press the cookies into Chloe's little hands, my granddaughter, who still ran to me when no one was watching. That hope kept me steady. As I raised my hand to knock, I remembered the long years of silence, the little dismissals that piled up like snowdrifts. She never called back when I left messages. She told people she had built her life on her own. She never thanked me when I mailed checks to cover her rent, saying only, "Got it." I swallowed it all because I thought time would fix it. Because I thought motherhood was stronger than neglect. Because I believed in miracles, even when I shouldn't. The door opened. For a second, warmth and music poured out. Emily stood there, her hair perfectly styled, her sweater expensive looking, her face the mirror of the little girl I used to hold. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Chloe, holding a candy cane, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. My heart surged. "Merry Christmas," I said softly, lifting the cookies like an offering. But Emily's smile was tight, her body blocking the doorway. "Mom, you should have called first," she said flatly. Daniel's voice floated from inside, annoyed. "Who is it?" Emily didn't answer him. Instead, she sighed, her eyes sliding past me as if I were some stranger selling magazines. And then, before I could speak again, before I could hand Chloe the cookies, Emily pulled the door shut, not gently, not politely. She slammed it so hard the wreath shook, the sound echoing in the cold night air. I stood there, my breath clouding white, the ribbon slipping from my fingers, the cookies trembling in my hands. Behind the door, I heard laughter resume, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't spent nearly 70 years building the life that had led to this doorstep. That sound, her laughter without me, cut sharper than any knife. I wanted to knock again, to beg, to remind her of the nights I stayed up sewing, of the bills I paid when she was broke, of the meals I skipped so she wouldn't go hungry. I wanted to scream that my existence mattered, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped back into the snow. The cold bit through my coat, but it felt honest at least. As I walked away from that glowing house, I realized something heavy and freeing at once. She had slammed the door not just on this Christmas, but on every sacrifice, every gift, every part of me. And for the first time in my life, I let her. I walked into the night, clutching the cookies, a mother without a place at her own daughter's table. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of a revenge story. Not the loud kind, not the cruel kind, but the quiet, aching kind, where justice would one day rise from silence. The morning after Christmas, the town looked washed clean, all the footprints from last night filled with fresh powder, like nothing had happened. I stood at my kitchen counter with a chipped mug of coffee cooling in my hands and stared at my phone. No message from Emily, no apology, no "come back, Mom," not even a lazy thumbs-up emoji. The silence felt louder than the slam had. I could still hear the wreath rattling on her door, the way the music muffled in an instant, as if the house had pulled breath and decided I was not air worth keeping. I set the phone down and looked around my little kitchen, my one safe room, and tried to replay 100 small moments that should have told me this was coming. There were signs everywhere, like hairline cracks you ignore until the mirror finally shatters. When Emily got her promotion in the spring, she texted the family group, her in that crisp blazer, standing under a company banner. "Did it all myself?" she wrote. I typed and erased, "Proud of you, honey," 3 times before sending it. She didn't respond, but Daniel replied with a row of flexed biceps and fire emojis, the modern parade for achievement. At Thanksgiving, I brought sweet potato casserole the way her grandmother taught me, a lace of marshmallow on top, nutmeg and cinnamon humming below. Emily took the dish from my hands without meeting my eyes and slid it to the sideboard, whispering to her friend that she had the real stuff catered this year. I told myself she was stressed, distracted, too busy hosting to say thank you. People forget their manners when the turkey is late, that's all. When Chloe turned 7, I mailed a handmade dress. Cream cotton with a blue ribbon stitched down the front, the kind of thing a little girl might twirl in until her hair came loose and the day smelled like cake. Emily posted a photo of Chloe in a glittery store-bought dress instead and tagged 3 brands. "She picked it herself," Emily wrote. I zoomed in on Chloe's smile and told myself the bow I'd tied on my package had probably come undone in transit, that maybe the dress was a little too old-fashioned. The truth pressed at me then, and I pressed back just as hard. I kept creating softer explanations, excuses you can sleep on, blankets to tuck the cold under, but even softness has edges, and they nick you every time you roll over. I thought about the day Emily moved into her new house, the one that glowed last night like a magazine spread. I stood on the front lawn holding a toolbox because I wanted to fix something, anything, to feel useful in a life I'd built with hands that now had nowhere to rest. Emily took a selfie with Daniel on the porch steps, and when I offered to hang shelves, she said, "It's okay, Mom, we've got a service." I nodded, smiling the way people smile when they're not invited inside, but pretend the air out here is better. Even then I could have said, "I paid off your last semester when the scholarship fell through. I kept the lights on when the landlord posted notices. I used my own credit so you'd have a chance at a mortgage, and that toolbox isn't for show." but it sounded like begging for gratitude, and I had promised myself I'd never beg my own child for love. The coffee went lukewarm. I poured it out, rinsed the cup, and wiped the counter clean of crumbs that weren't there. Around noon, I stepped outside to shovel the walk. The sun had that weak winter courage that makes everything look forgiving. Ruth from 2 doors down waved. "You all right, Maggie?" she called, the way Midwestern women ask about the weather and your heart in one sentence. "Fine," I said, which felt like saying the sky was green. Ruth came closer, her boots sighing in the snow. "You didn't go to Emily's last night," she offered, as if the town itself had noticed the missing piece in the picture. I pressed the shovel into the ice. "I did," I said. "The door wasn't taking visitors." Ruth's breath hung white. She didn't ask for details, bless her. She just stood there with me until the ache in my chest thinned out to something I could fold and put away for later. She touched my sleeve. "You gave that girl the whole of you. Sometimes people forget the hands that lifted them until they need lifting again." I nodded, swallowing the flint in my throat. There's a particular humiliation that comes with being unnecessary to the person you were necessary for the longest time. Work doesn't prepare you for it. Church doesn't prepare you for it. You think love is a ladder and you'll always be at least a rung. But some daughters learn to climb without looking down. Back inside, I found myself scrolling through old messages, through photos of Emily with scraped knees and Halloween makeup, her mouth sticky with icing, her arms slung around my neck like I was a cliff and she was the sea. A voice inside me, old and stubborn, said, "Call her. Tell her the cookies are still fresh. Ask to come by today. Ask her what you did wrong." But that voice worked for the old terms, the ones where I did the reaching and she did the receiving. I put the phone down again, palms flat like I was smoothing a tablecloth before a meal I wasn't invited to. You who are listening, if this had been your door, would you have knocked again or walked away? I'm not asking for advice. I'm asking because I think we all have a door like that, somewhere in our lives, and we don't talk about how it teaches us our worth. By late afternoon, the sky pulled on its gray coat. I made soup I didn't want and ate it standing up because sitting felt too formal for grief. In the living room, the tree lights blinked, on, off, on, as if testing whether I was still paying attention. I shut them off. The quiet settled around me, and for the first time in months, it wasn't the enemy. It was a witness. I thought about the math of a lifetime, the hours and dollars, the favors and forgivings, the nights I'd worked until my fingers went numb, so Emily's life could be soft where mine had been hard. I thought about the way she'd started telling the world she was self-made, the way she shrugged off history like an old coat she'd outgrown. That was the part that stung deepest. Not the rudeness, not the slam door, but the story she preferred where I wasn't in it. Erasure is a colder thing than hatred. Hatred at least turns its face toward you. I washed the soup bowl and left it to dry. Then, because muscle remembers even when the heart forgets, I threaded my old singer and set a hem for Mrs. Alvarez down the block. The needle rose and fell, neat and faithful, a metronome I could trust. The fabric slid under my hands, and the rhythm filled the room with a small, stubborn dignity. I didn't know what tomorrow would ask of me, or how many more times I would be expected to be invisible. I only knew this. If love was a house, I had built mine square and strong, and I could live in it by myself if I had to. Outside, the street lamp clicked on. Somewhere, a radio played a carol. I switched off the sewing machine and listened to the silence again, and it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to decide that the next time I stepped onto a porch, it would be because someone had opened the door, not because I was waiting to prove I deserved to come in. In that quiet, the first plank of my new boundary slid into place. Not a wall, not yet, but a threshold I could carry with me. And for now, that was enough. It was a Sunday in February when the words finally landed like glass, shattering across the kitchen floor. I was at Emily's house, invited over in what felt like a rare gesture. She'd called that morning, short, businesslike, asking if I could stop by to watch Chloe while she and Daniel ran errands. My heart leapt at the chance, because no matter how cold things had gotten, Chloe was still a piece of light that reminded me who I was. A grandmother, a mother, a woman who still had purpose. I showed up early, casserole dish in my hands, because that was still my language. Feeding, nurturing, giving. Emily barely glanced at it as she grabbed her purse. "We'll be back in a few hours," she said, as if she were talking to a babysitter, not her own mother. I smiled and nodded, but the words tucked under my ribs in that familiar ache. Chloe ran into my arms, all pigtails and energy. "Grandma, can we bake cookies?" she asked, and for a while the world made sense again. We mixed sugar and flour, her little hands scattering sprinkles across the counter. She licked the spoon when she thought I wasn't looking, and I laughed, remembering Emily at that same age, perched on my countertop, doing the very same thing. For those few hours, love was easy, but when Emily came home, everything shifted. She set down her shopping bags and frowned at the mess. "Mom, did you really have to let her get flour everywhere? Now I've got to clean this up before guests arrive." I opened my mouth to apologize, but Chloe jumped in, holding up her cookie. "But Mommy, Grandma taught me just like you said she used to when she was little." Emily's face hardened. She looked right at me, her voice sharp and flat. "That's not true. I worked for everything I have. Nobody handed me anything. Not you. Not anyone. I made my life what it is, all on my own." The words hit harder than if she'd slapped me. I felt my fingers tremble around the dish towel I was holding. For a second, I thought maybe I misheard. Maybe she didn't mean it that way. But the silence that followed, the way Daniel smirked as he walked past us, told me I had heard exactly what she intended. I wanted to remind her of the nights I stayed awake, mending her prom dress because we couldn't afford a new one. I wanted to remind her how I worked double shifts when her car broke down, just so she could drive to college. I wanted to remind her of the rent checks I mailed in secret because I couldn't stand to see eviction notices taped to her door. But all I managed was a weak, "Emily, I was there. I was always there." She shook her head, lips pressed thin. "You helped with small things, sure, but everything that matters, I did by myself." Chloe's cookie crumbled in her hands. My granddaughter's wide eyes flicked between us, confused, uncertain. I forced a smile for her sake, but inside, something collapsed. Do you know what it feels like to have your entire existence rewritten in one sentence? To watch the decades of sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal skipped, every dollar stretched, vanish under the weight of someone else's pride? It feels like being erased. It feels like standing in front of a chalkboard where your whole life has been written, only to watch your child drag a hand across it, sweeping it all away in a single motion. That night, after Chloe went to bed, I tried again. Emily and Daniel were sitting on the couch, glasses of wine in hand. I sat across from them, my back straight, my voice gentle. "Emily, I never asked for credit. I never wanted applause. But please don't pretend I wasn't there. You know I gave you everything I had." Daniel chuckled under his breath. "See, this is why we don't like bringing this up. Always so dramatic. Everyone works hard. You're not special." Emily didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me. She scrolled through her phone instead, her face glowing in the blue light, as if I were nothing more than background noise. I left quietly. I didn't slam doors. I didn't cry in front of them. I stepped into the night, the cold air cutting sharp against my cheeks, and walked to my car with my hands shoved deep in my pockets. My breath clouded in front of me, disappearing as fast as I exhaled, and I thought, that's what I am to her now, something that vanishes, leaving no trace. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off. The casserole dish sat untouched beside me, still warm, still offering comfort no one wanted. I stared at it and thought of all the meals I had cooked when there wasn't enough to go around, how I had always made sure Emily's plate was full before I even thought about mine. And now she told me none of it mattered, none of it counted, none of it existed. It wasn't just denial, it was cruel denial. The kind that digs under your skin, rewriting history until even you start to doubt if it happened. I pinched the edge of the dish towel until the fabric twisted in my hand. I was there, I whispered to the empty room. I was always there. The room didn't answer. The world didn't shift to validate me. But deep inside, a small ember glowed. Anger, yes, but also something else. A stubbornness I hadn't felt in years. Because maybe Emily could erase me from her story, but I knew the truth. And one day, that truth would stand taller than denial. That night, I folded the dish towel neatly, placed the casserole in the fridge, and went to bed without turning on the tree lights. It was the first time Christmas felt like nothing more than a date on the calendar. And it was the first time I admitted to myself that love, no matter how deep, cannot survive on denial. It was early spring when the humiliation began to drip, one little cut at a time. Not loud, not violent, just enough to sting, just enough to remind me that in my daughter's home, I was no longer someone to be honored. I was someone to be managed, like clutter you don't throw out only because someone might notice. Emily had invited me over for dinner. That in itself felt like a rare kindness, and I dressed as carefully as I could. My one good cardigan, a necklace I'd kept since her high school graduation, my hair pinned neatly back. I carried a pie I baked that morning, still warm in its tin. The crust had cracked slightly, but it smelled of cinnamon and sugar, the way Emily used to love it when she was little. When I arrived, the house was buzzing. Daniel's co-workers were there, along with a few of Emily's friends. The dining table glowed with candles, crystal glasses lined in neat rows. I stood in the doorway with my pie, unsure where to place myself in all this glitter. Emily spotted me and came over, smiling too brightly. "Mom, you're here," she said, but the warmth never touched her eyes. She took the pie from my hands, glanced at it, and then set it on a side counter far from the main dishes. I watched as she slid it behind a row of wine bottles as if it might embarrass her. When we sat for dinner, every chair at the long polished table was filled, except one near the corner. I walked toward it, relieved to find a place waiting, but as I lowered myself, the chair wobbled dangerously. One leg was splintered, and when I shifted my weight, the whole frame groaned. "Oh," I said softly, half rising. Daniel laughed, not kindly but sharply, the kind of laugh that cuts more than it amuses. "Guess you got the old chair, huh? Don't lean too hard or it'll collapse." A few guests chuckled along, their eyes darting toward Emily for cues. I forced a smile, though heat rushed to my cheeks. "It's fine," I murmured, adjusting myself carefully, as if balancing on dignity instead of wood. But inside, I felt the burn of shame. This wasn't an accident. In a house full of solid chairs, this one had been chosen for me. The meal began. Plates passed, glasses clinked. When the roasted chicken reached me, I served myself a modest piece. Chloe, sitting across from me, looked at my plate and giggled. "Grandma, you always pick the wings." I laughed softly, glad she remembered. But before I could take a bite, Emily leaned over, her voice sharp but sweetened for the table. "Mom, could you pass that to Daniel? He likes the wings." She slid her fork against my plate, lifting the piece of chicken I had chosen and setting it onto Daniel's dish. The table chuckled as though it were a harmless little joke. Daniel winked at me as he chewed. I looked down at my plate, now empty but for the smear of gravy. My throat tightened. I nodded, pretending I didn't mind, pretending this was generosity instead of humiliation. But Chloe's smile faded. She looked at me, confused, sensing something wasn't right. Dessert came next. Emily unveiled a glossy cake from the local bakery, 3 layers decorated like something from a magazine. Guests applauded, phones came out for pictures. My pie, still warm in its tin, sat forgotten in the corner, half hidden behind the wine. Nobody touched it. Nobody even mentioned it. When I tried to bring it forward, Emily waved her hand dismissively. "Maybe later, Mom. Let's not clutter the table." Clutter. That word lodged in me like a splinter. A lifetime of feeding her, of filling her belly with bread and soup when there was barely enough to go around. And now the food I brought was clutter. As the night went on, conversation bubbled around me, laughter swelling, wine flowing. I sat quietly on my shaky chair, hands folded in my lap, pie cooling behind bottles, appetite gone. The humiliations were small enough to be dismissed by others, but heavy enough to crush me. That's how it works, you see. Death by 1,000 little cuts. Nobody else at the table saw what was happening, or if they did, they chose to look away. Later, as guests trickled out, Chloe slipped her hand into mine. "Grandma, can I taste your pie?" she whispered. Her eyes were wide, hopeful. I cut her a slice in the kitchen, and she took a bite, her smile blooming. "This is my favorite," she said, her voice sticky with sugar. I kissed the top of her head and held her close, grateful for this one small mercy. But when Emily came in, she frowned. "Chloe, no more sweets? You'll spoil your teeth." She took the plate from her hands and dropped it into the sink with a clatter. My pie slid into the trash with the scrape of porcelain. I stood frozen, my heart a tight fist. Emily didn't look at me. She was already wiping the counter, her movements brisk and efficient, as though erasing not just crumbs but the evidence of me. That night, walking home, the cold bit deeper than usual. I carried nothing in my hands, not the pie tin, not leftovers, not even dignity. Just silence. And as I unlocked my door and stepped into the stillness of my little kitchen, I realized humiliation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, dressed as hospitality, disguised as laughter, but it seeps into your bones all the same. I sat down, staring at my empty hands, and whispered to the dark, I gave her everything, and now I am nothing in her house. The invitation came like a flicker of light in a long tunnel. Emily called me one evening in May, her voice unusually warm. "Mom, it's Chloe's recital next weekend. We'd love for you to come." I froze, the dish sponge dripping water onto my counter. It had been weeks since she'd called me for anything other than a favor. "Of course," I said, maybe too quickly, my heart racing. I wouldn't miss it. For days, I prepared. I ironed my best blouse, wrapped a little bouquet of daisies with ribbon, and even pulled out the camera I hadn't used since Emily's college graduation. I told myself this was a turning point, a chance to be recognized, to be seen again, not as an afterthought, but as part of the family. The auditorium was packed, parents buzzing, programs fluttering in their hands. I found Emily near the front, standing with Daniel and Chloe. She smiled at me, a small, tight smile, but enough to keep hope alive. Chloe ran up and hugged me, her little arms strong around my waist. "Grandma, did you bring flowers?" she whispered. I showed her the bouquet and her face lit up. "They're my favorite." Emily gestured toward the second row near the aisle. "I saved you a seat," she said, and my chest filled with warmth. It had been years since she saved me anything. I sat down, smoothing my skirt, watching Chloe take her place on stage. For once, I felt like I belonged. The music started, children moving in uneven harmony, their bows squeaking, their little shoes tapping. Chloe glanced toward the second row, her eyes finding me, her smile shy and proud. I clapped louder than anyone, not caring who noticed. When the performance ended, the room erupted in applause. Children bowed, parents surged forward with cameras and flowers. I rose, clutching my bouquet, ready to step forward to finally hand my granddaughter something that said, "I see you, I love you." But before I could, Emily appeared at my side. "Mom," she said, her voice low but firm. "Let's wait here. Daniel's parents are going up first." I hesitated, the flowers trembling in my hand. "But Chloe, she's looking for me." "She'll see you later," Emily said briskly, guiding me back toward my seat. I watched as Daniel's parents, who lived states away, who had barely been in Chloe's life, strode forward, their arms full of roses. Chloe accepted them politely, but her eyes darted toward me, questioning. I raised the bouquet a little, smiling weakly, but Emily caught the gesture and pressed my hand down. "Later, Mom," she whispered, her tone leaving no room for protest. The family gathered for photos on stage. I started to rise again, but Emily's voice snapped like a whip. "Not now. We'll do one with you afterward." So I sat, bouquet pressed against my lap, watching from the second row as camera flashes exploded. Chloe stood between her parents, clutching roses that weren't from me. Daniel's arm was slung around Emily's shoulder, both of them smiling wide, radiant for the crowd. And me? I wasn't in the frame at all. When the photos ended, people milled about, laughing, congratulating. Chloe slipped away from the group and ran toward me. "Grandma, can I have the flowers now?" she whispered, her eyes bright. I handed them to her, my hands shaking. She hugged them tight, her smile real and wide. For a moment, the sting faded, but Emily's voice cut through again. "Chloe, let's go. We're taking more pictures outside." She took the bouquet from her daughter's hands, set it on a chair, and steered her away. I stared at the daisies, abandoned among crumpled programs and half-empty water bottles. Outside, the family posed for more photos, under the marquee, in the sunlight, surrounded by relatives and friends. I lingered near the steps, waiting for Emily to wave me in. She didn't. I raised my camera, capturing them from a distance, blurry figures of a family I once believed I was central to. Finally, when most guests had left, Emily turned. "Mom, could you take one of us with Chloe?" she asked, handing me her phone. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I snapped the picture, steady hands despite the tremor in my chest. And that was my role. Not in the photo, but behind it. Not celebrated, but useful. A background presence. That night, back home, I looked through my own camera. Only a few shots. Chloe on stage, Chloe bowing, Chloe laughing. None of me, not one picture to prove I'd been there. I placed the daisies, now wilted, into a glass of water, though I knew they wouldn't last. I sat at my table, staring at the stems, and realized what had happened. For a brief moment, I thought I had been given a place again. I thought saving me a seat, smiling at me, meant something had shifted. But it was only a placeholder, a false recognition, an empty gesture that crumbled as soon as the real moment came. There's a cruelty in hope. It keeps you standing at the edge of belonging, ready to step in, only to watch the door close again. Tonight I learned the lesson clearly. I could be present in the room, but still erased from the story. And as I sat in the quiet, listening to the refrigerator hum in the kitchen, I felt the truth settle deep. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers pushing you out. It comes from the ones you love most, inviting you close enough to believe you matter, then showing you that you don't. The summer came quietly that year, with long evenings where the sky stayed pale until nearly 9 o'clock. I remember sitting on my porch, listening to cicadas buzz like 100 clocks winding down, my phone face up on the table beside me. I kept waiting for it to light up. A text, a call, anything from Emily. Weeks slipped by, and nothing came, not even a picture of Chloe. Though I saw hints of her life online, posed photos of summer camps, birthday parties, family outings. Emily posted them on social media, smiling with friends, tagging Daniel's relatives, but never once including me. It was as if she had edited me out of the album of her life. At first, I thought maybe I'd missed an invitation. Technology isn't always my friend. Maybe I hadn't checked the right group chat. So I opened the family thread, the one we used for holidays and birthdays. My name was gone, completely removed, like I had never been there. I stared at the screen, blinking, as though if I refreshed it enough times, I would reappear. But no. The circle of names and faces was smaller now, tidier, without me. My heart thumped in that hollow way it does when the world decides you're unnecessary. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Emily was reorganizing. But then the phone buzzed. Ruth from 2 doors down, my neighbor, texting, "I saw Emily's big barbecue on Saturday. Looked like fun. I didn't see you there, though. Were you feeling okay?" Barbecue. I hadn't even known there was one. I closed my eyes and imagined it. The house lit up, kids running through sprinklers, Chloe chasing bubbles, Daniel at the grill, Emily holding a tray of lemonade. I could almost smell the smoke of burgers and hear the laughter spilling out onto the lawn. But in that picture, I wasn't anywhere. Isolation doesn't come all at once. It sneaks in. It's the unreturned calls, the unopened gifts, the unanswered doorbells. It's sitting on your porch with a phone that never rings. It's the realization that the family you built has built something new without you, and they prefer it that way. One Sunday, the church bulletin announced Chloe's baptism, anniversary celebration. My chest swelled. Surely I would be there. I dressed in my best blue dress and showed up at the church, carrying a small silver locket I had saved for her. But when I stepped inside, the pews were already filled. Emily's eyes widened when she saw me, surprise flickering before it hardened into something else. "We didn't think you'd come," she whispered, her smile fixed for the crowd. "Why wouldn't I asked softly, holding up the little box. She glanced at Daniel, then back at me. "Mom, we kept it small this year, just close friends and family." The words struck like cold water. Just family. I wanted to ask, what am I then? But I swallowed it, lowering myself into a pew at the far back. I watched as Chloe beamed under the stained glass light, surrounded by people who called themselves hers. My gift stayed unopened in my lap, heavy as stone. After the service, I walked up quietly, locket in hand. Chloe reached for it, her eyes bright, but Emily intercepted, pressing a cupcake into her hands instead. "Later, sweetie. Let's not get messy now." She slipped the box from me, tucking it into her purse without opening it. And just like that, the moment was gone. When I got home, I sat at the table staring at the empty space where that box had been. My kitchen hummed with silence. I thought about all the rooms I used to fill, Emily's bedroom with folded laundry, her lunchbox with sandwiches, her college dorm with care packages. Now I filled nothing. No rooms, no conversations, not even a square on her phone. I wonder, do you know this kind of silence? The kind that doesn't just surround you but defines you, as if your absence is easier for people than your presence? Have you ever felt erased from your own family story, like you were a chapter torn out so the book would read smoother? That night, I tried calling Emily once more. It rang and rang until voicemail picked up. Her voice was cheerful in the recording. "You've reached Emily Carter. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I left no message. I knew she wouldn't call back. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the cross-stitch hanging on the wall, one I'd made years ago, stitched with the words, "Home is where your mother is." The irony was sharp enough to make me laugh, though it came out broken. Isolation, I realized, wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. It was being told in 100 small ways that your story had ended, even though you were still here. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, "I was there. I'm still here." The words felt fragile, but they were mine. They were proof, because even if the world chose not to see me, I would not erase myself. It was a rainy Saturday in late September when I noticed the first absence. I had gone to Emily's house with a bag of apples from the farmer's market, hoping Chloe might want to bake a pie together. Emily answered the door, polite but distracted, telling me Chloe was busy with homework. She took the apples without inviting me in, promising vaguely, "We'll use them later." But as she turned, I caught a glimpse of the living room. The mantel was lined with picture frames, bright, glossy, new. Daniel in a suit, Emily with her hair curled, Chloe holding a puppy I didn't know they'd gotten. I stepped closer, heart fluttering, scanning for the photo I had given Emily years ago, the one of her, me, and Chloe on her first day of school. Emily wore pigtails, Chloe sat on my lap, and I looked exhausted but proud. That photo had been in a silver frame on the mantel for as long as I could remember. It was gone, replaced by something newer, shinier. I didn't say anything then. I stood there, nodding at the puppy picture as Emily shut the door behind her. But when I walked back to my car, the rain slipping down my coat, I felt the absence like a stone in my chest. It wasn't just a photo, it was proof that I had been there, proof that I mattered. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more. When I stopped by to drop off Chloe's birthday present, the quilt I had made for her crib was missing from her bed. Instead, there was a bright comforter patterned with cartoon characters. The quilt, stitched by my hands in late nights, each square chosen with care, had simply vanished. Later, at a neighborhood yard sale, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There, folded neatly on a table with a handwritten tag, was a sweater I had knitted for Emily years ago. I recognized the pale lavender yarn, the tiny, uneven stitches from when I was first learning. I picked it up, fingers trembling over the fabric that had once carried my love. Emily's neighbor smiled. "Oh, that came from Emily's place. Isn't it sweet?" I put it down quickly, my throat closing. Sweet. That's what they called it, not knowing it was a piece of me laid out for strangers to paw through, priced at $5. I walked home empty-handed that day, the world gray and heavy. Loss is one thing when you can name it, when you can say, this person died, this object broke, this memory faded. But unseen loss is crueler. It's the vanishing you can't announce, the absence you can't point to without sounding petty. Who would understand my grief over a missing photograph, a quilt gone, a sweater discarded? Who would call that tragedy except the one who stitched herself into those things? One evening, Ruth came over with a casserole, her kindness filling the silence of my kitchen. She noticed the way I stared at the walls, my hands restless. "You're thinking again," she said softly. I nodded. It's like I'm being erased one piece at a time, not with anger, not with fights, but with silence, like I never existed in their story. Ruth touched my hand. "Things don't make memories vanish. You still carry them." But that was the problem. I carried them, alone. Emily had set them down, sold them, thrown them out, replaced them. She was rewriting our history, and I was the only one left clutching the old version. One night, I pulled out a shoebox from the back of my closet. Inside were scraps of my life with her. Birthday cards she had drawn as a child, little notes she'd slipped under my door saying, "I love you, Mommy." I traced the crayon letters with my finger, remembering the little girl who once believed I was her whole world. That little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who insisted she had built everything herself. As I sat there, I realized this was the cruelest stage of grief. Not the loud door slams, not the sharp words of denial, but the quiet removal of evidence, the gradual disappearance of me from their home, their story, their memory. I whispered to the dark as if the walls could hold me. I was here. I was here. It didn't echo back. The room stayed still, but saying it aloud felt like planting a flag in the ground, a small defiance against the erasure. Because if no one else would remember, I would. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the rain trace crooked paths down the glass and thought about how fragile presence is. You can spend your life building, giving, loving, and it can vanish without a fight, without a word, without even a goodbye. But I also thought about Chloe's smile when she hugged me, about the way her little arms still reached for me instinctively. She hadn't erased me yet. Maybe she never would. And that small thought kept me breathing. The night it finally snapped wasn't planned. It never is. Breaking points come quietly, like water wearing away stone, until the rock splits with one last drop. It was November, the town already draped in holiday lights, the streets humming with shoppers and early Christmas music. Emily had insisted I join them for a dinner at a downtown restaurant. "It'll be nice to have you there," she said on the phone, her voice casual. I clung to those words like they meant something. Maybe this was her way of pulling me back in. The restaurant was busy, the kind of place where silverware clinks and laughter ricochets off high ceilings. I wore my good winter coat, the one I'd bought years ago with a coupon and a brooch I hadn't worn in ages. I wanted to look like I belonged. At the table, Daniel's parents were already seated, glasses of wine in their hands. Emily waved me over, her smile tight but polite. I sat down, smoothing my napkin across my lap, grateful for the inclusion. Chloe was there too, coloring quietly on the kids' menu, her small hand clutching a red crayon. For a while, it felt almost normal. The waiter poured water, bread baskets were passed, and conversation flowed around me. I listened, nodding when appropriate, careful not to interrupt. Then, somewhere between appetizers and the main course, the conversation shifted. Daniel was telling a story about their move into the new house, about how hard they'd worked to make it all happen. His mother clucked proudly. "You two built such a beautiful life, all on your own." Emily's eyes flicked toward me, just for a second before she nodded. "Yeah, we've done everything ourselves." The words landed like a knife. Again, the denial sharpened in public. My chest tightened, but I kept my smile small, not wanting to cause a scene. Then Daniel leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. "Well, except when your mom tries to help," he said, his tone dripping sarcasm. "Though honestly, it's more trouble than it's worth. Right, Em?" Emily gave a short laugh, the kind meant to smooth over discomfort. "Oh, stop," she said, but she didn't defend me. The table chuckled along, and I felt the heat rush to my face. I opened my mouth, desperate to speak, to reclaim some sliver of dignity. But before I could, Daniel's father cut in. "Well, Maggie, I suppose it's harder at your age. You probably can't keep up with everything." The laughter bubbled again, louder this time. I sat frozen, my fork heavy in my hand, my throat tight. Chloe looked up from her coloring, eyes wide, sensing something wasn't right. I managed a thin smile, my lips trembling. "I do what I can," I said softly. But my voice was drowned by the swell of conversation, the sound of wine glasses clinking, the scrape of chairs. Then came the final blow. Dessert arrived, little plates of cheesecake and chocolate tarts. Chloe reached for mine, her fingers sticky with chocolate. I laughed gently, sliding the plate toward her. "Of course, sweetheart." But Emily's voice cut across the table, sharp as glass. "Mom, please don't feed her more sugar. You always overdo it. That's why she gets sick." The table went quiet, eyes darting toward me. Heat flushed my face, shame curling in my stomach. My granddaughter looked between us, confused, her fork halfway to her mouth. I wanted to explain, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I set my hands in my lap and looked down, blinking hard to keep the tears from spilling. The silence stretched, heavy and humiliating, until Daniel chuckled again, filling the void. "See what I mean?" he said lightly. "Always a handful." Laughter followed, softer this time, but enough. Enough to split the stone inside me. That was the moment, the breaking point, not the slammed doors, not the erased photos, not even the cruel denials whispered at home. It was here, at a table full of people, where my dignity was stripped clean, where I was reduced to a punchline. I sat there, my body still, my mind roaring. I thought of the nights I worked until dawn so Emily could sleep in a warm bed. I thought of the meals skipped, the bills paid, the sacrifices made in silence, and here I was, dismissed, ridiculed, erased in front of strangers. I excused myself quietly, pushing back my chair. "Restroom," I muttered, though no one really looked at me. In the bathroom, I gripped the sink, staring at my reflection under harsh, fluorescent light. My eyes were red, my cheeks flushed. I barely recognized the woman staring back. A voice rose inside me, steady and unshakable. No more. I returned to the table, collected my coat, and kissed Chloe gently on the head. "Grandma has to go, sweetheart," I whispered. She looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes, but she nodded. Emily glanced up, surprised. "Leaving already?" "Yes," I said simply, my voice calm. "Enjoy your evening." I walked out into the cold November night, the city lights shimmering on wet pavement. My breath rose in white clouds, each step carrying me farther from the table where I had been diminished. I didn't know where the road would take me, but I knew this. I would never again sit at a table where I was treated as less than nothing. That night, something cracked open inside me, not broken, not ruined, but awakened. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind where the air felt heavy with gray clouds, when Ruth stopped by with her grocery bag and a smile. We sat at my kitchen table, sipping weak coffee, the kind I never bothered to brew strong when it was only for me. She talked about her grandchildren for a while, about their school projects and soccer games, and I listened politely, though my heart wasn't really in it. Finally, she set her cup down and looked at me with those steady eyes of hers. "Maggie," she said gently, "you've given that girl everything, more than most mothers would, and still she treats you like a burden. You can't keep bleeding for someone who won't even notice your cut." The words sank into me like rain into dry earth. I didn't answer right away. I thought about Emily's laughter at the restaurant, Daniel's smirk, the photos replaced on the mantel. All the pieces of my life swept aside as though they had never belonged to me. I whispered almost to myself, "I don't think she'll ever see it." Ruth reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Then stop waiting for her to. See it yourself. You're still here, Maggie. Don't let her convince you that you're invisible." That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the old shoebox again. Inside were the cards Emily had made when she was little. "Happy birthday, Mommy," written in shaky crayon letters, hearts drawn backwards, stick figures of us holding hands. Tears burned my eyes, but something shifted inside me. Those cards were proof. I had mattered. I had been loved once. And if that love had faded from her memory, it still lived in mine. I lit a candle on the table, breathing in the faint scent of vanilla. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Maybe Emily would never recognize me. Maybe she would go on telling the world she built everything herself. But I didn't need her to rewrite the truth. I had lived it. I had carried her, fed her, clothed her, loved her. That was real, whether she acknowledged it or not. And sitting there, I realized something powerful. I didn't need her recognition anymore. I needed my own. Tell me honestly, have you ever woken up one day and realized you were giving pieces of yourself to someone who never even said thank you? Did you keep giving, hoping they'd notice, until finally it broke you? Because if you have, you know the strange relief that comes when you stop waiting. That night, I whispered into the quiet, not to Emily, not to Ruth, but to myself. "I see you. I recognize you. And you are enough." The choice came quietly, like most turning points do. No storm, no shouting, just the steady whisper inside me. It's time. One evening, I opened my closet and pulled out a small suitcase. I didn't need much. Just a few clothes, the old scissors from my sewing kit, and the photo of Chloe when she was 3. The one where she's asleep on my chest, her hair tangled, her hand clutching mine. I placed it carefully between folded sweaters. The apartment was still, the kind of silence that doesn't demand anything. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the walls I'd lived within for decades. Every nail, every chipped paint corner carried memories, but I realized they were mine to carry now, not Emily's. She had her story, and I had to start writing mine. There was no letter left on the table, no phone call to announce my departure. I had explained myself enough times in my life, begged enough times for recognition. This time, I would leave with no explanations. I moved slowly, savoring the quiet freedom in each motion. I unplugged the lamp I'd always liked. the one with the soft amber shade. I tucked in a small jar of buttons, silly maybe, but they reminded me of all the nights I sewed to hold our life together. When the bag was zipped, I stood for a long time, listening. The silence felt different now, less empty, more like a companion. It said, "You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose yourself." So I turned off the lights, picked up the suitcase, and stepped outside. The night air was cool, steady against my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't leaving somewhere. I was moving towards something. Unknown, maybe, but mine. The first morning in my new apartment, sunlight spilled across the floorboards like a quiet blessing. The space was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was mine. No echoes of slammed doors, no sharp voices cutting through the air, just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. I made coffee stronger than I ever did before because there was no one to tell me it was too bitter. I placed a vase of fresh daisies on the table, not for a guest, not for a family gathering, but for me. For once, beauty didn't need an audience. Later that week, I passed a store window and stopped. Hanging on the mannequin was a dress in soft blue, simple but elegant. I had walked by dozens of dresses in my life, always telling myself they were unnecessary, that money should go to Emily's school supplies, to rent, to food. But now it was my choice. I stepped inside, tried it on, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman smiling back. I bought it without hesitation. In the evenings, I set up a corner with my old Singer sewing machine. The sound of the needle rising and falling filled the room with rhythm, steady and soothing. I started repairing clothes for neighbors, then stitching little aprons and pillowcases. They paid me modestly, but it wasn't about the money. It was about feeling useful again, feeling alive again on my own terms. Chloe visited sometimes, slipping away from her parents to spend an afternoon with me. We baked cookies, laughed at the flour on our noses, and she told me secrets in the hushed voice of a child who trusts completely. Her visits were rare, but they were enough. Enough to remind me I wasn't gone from her world, not yet. And in the quiet of those nights, wearing my blue dress, drinking my strong coffee, listening to the hum of my machine, I realized something profound. I hadn't disappeared. I had simply been reborn. Not loudly, not for recognition, but quietly. For myself. The night was cool, the sky clear enough for stars to scatter like tiny promises. I stood by the river with a small box in my hands. Inside were the last pieces I'd carried from the old life. A photo of Emily as a child, a note she once scribbled in crayon, and a ribbon from Chloe's hair. These were the fragments that had weighed on me, both anchor and chain. I opened the box slowly, the paper edges soft from years of being handled. For a moment, I almost closed it again. Memories are hard to release, even when they hurt. But then I thought of all the nights I'd begged silently to be seen, of all the humiliation swallowed, of the erasure endured, and I knew this was the moment to let go. One by one, I dropped the pieces into the water. The current took them gently, carrying them out of sight, like chapters finally written and set free. My hands felt lighter, my chest unburdened. Back at my apartment, I sat at the table with a notebook. I wrote only one line. I don't need anyone else to remember me. I remember myself. I am enough. Then I closed the book and placed it beside the vase of daisies. The next morning, I dressed in my blue dress, tied my hair back, and stepped outside. The sunlight was warm, the street alive with ordinary noise, dogs barking, cars humming, children laughing. I walked forward with no weight pulling me back. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because they gave me permission, not because they finally recognized me, but because I had chosen it for myself. And that, I realized, was the truest kind of victory. Tell me, have you ever had to let go of something or someone just to find yourself again?